Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video. You will never guess where I just got back from. So I wanted to do my reaction video. I could have maybe recorded it while I was still in Southern California, but I had a quick turnaround time. I'll post those travel videos up later, but as many of you probably already know, I was invited by the Chevrolet team to join them for their Chevy Bolt block party event. There's been a lot of clamor about the upcoming 2027 Chevrolet Bolt. I've participated in a lot of that. I helped to feed some of the rumor mills, and yeah, so they just went ahead and invited a bunch of EV reporters, Bolt EV enthusiasts, different social media channels to this event at Universal Studios in LA, and of course I partook. I wanted to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, get all the details, and just up front, go ahead and disclose all of this. Is they did offer to pay for travel, so I could have in theory flown down if I had wanted to, up to 2 nights in a hotel just about the event. And they paid for food, they paid for all basically accommodations and everything else. But of course these are journalists, and GM Chevrolet representatives are professionals. This was no strings attached, no caveats, no NDAs, no embargoes as far as I know. So everything that we were shown, we're allowed to discuss. All of my opinions are my own. It goes from pretty much anyone else that you see from there. I met a lot of cool people. Met up with Nikki again from Transport Evolved, Jim from Jim's EV Adventures, Jim Bolt EV Adventures, EUV, right? And then of course some of the bigger names were there as well. I know representatives from some larger channels, from some larger networks. So Nathan from TFL was there, Dave from Out of Spec was there. So there's a lot of who's who, and I know a lot of people have already started to report on what they heard there, what they saw there. I haven't really read any of the other accounts yet, so this is all before that. There might be some stuff I missed that was accounted for by other people. It was sort of a diffuse event in terms of they had their main speech and their talking points and presentation, but outside of that, it was really kind of on us to go exploring and talk to different GM representatives, what they were free to talk about, what they knew to talk about, and then just in terms of just the different experiences, different GM Chevrolet representatives who were there. So there were some things that I kind of forgot to ask about that we'll see. Maybe someone else caught that. I know one of the things in particular was the heat pump. I forgot to ask about the heat pump in particular. And then some of it they didn't have specific questions, but you kind of could infer from just the design of the Bolt what we can expect. Like I said, I didn't get a direct confirmation of the onboard charger being that 11.5 kilowatt charger, but they did basically say, well, it's the same charger that's on the Blazer and Equinox EV, right? So there's an option for a 19.2 kilowatt charger, of course, in that greater GM EV lineup. But one, it wouldn't make sense, right, on a Bolt, and I don't even know if it would fit. So that's kind of an educated assumption, but there was a lot more very specific information that we received. So I kind of want to go over those high points. Yeah, I have all of my details, so I've already pre-written an article that I'll be posting on my newsletter on Substack, and I'll be putting a link to that in the video description as well. So I'll go into maybe even more detail in that. But yeah, I have a lot of thoughts Are you going to help or are you going to hurt? Okay, so in terms of the event, just getting started, they took us to Universal Studios, the Universal Studios lot, and at first it kind of felt like they were just doing a standard tour while they got things ready. And I think it was kind of nice. What they ended up doing is while we were on the tram doing the Universal lot tour, and I lived in Southern California in the greater LA area for over 20 years, and I've never actually gone on that Universal Studios tour, the lot tour. But as we went through, they had inserted the new Chevy Bolt into the lot in different scenes, right? And then they would stop, and we could kind of watch them. So it was nice. It was nice and entertaining, and kept the tour relevant to the Bolt, but I think all of that was just as they're sort of getting prepped for that block party. So after we got through all of that, they invited us out to this block party in one of the sections of the studio lot. And Shad Balch started the presentation. And, just one of the high points from that presentation is this Chevy Bolt marks the 15th EV that's available from GM. And I know people have had some weird interpretations of GM's marketing in terms of how many EVs they're going to produce, but I believe this might just be in the domestic market, just counting them all out in my head. So the new Bolt EV being the 15th EV on offering in terms of EV models, I think that puts them in the number one slot. Like, no, I don't think anybody else. And then globally, you're really looking at just maybe a couple of, Chinese car companies like BYD that have more different EV models available. So that was a nice little call out, a feather in their cap, and I think just a confirmation that GM is committed to EVs, right? It's not like they're really backpedaling like a lot of times what you'll hear in the news or the naysayers. So that was just a good reiteration from Shad. And then Mandy Damon, who is the executive chief engineer for the Chevy Bolt, and it sounds like she was brought in as early as like when Josh Tavel and Pam Fletcher were still in it. So she's been with the Bolt program for a long time. I think that she said since 2016. So that's as they were starting to, the original Bolt EV was starting to roll off the lot. And one of the first things that she called out, and I guess I kind of missed this when I was reviewing the 2023 Chevrolet Bolt EUV, as people were having issues with the brake lights. And I mean, it wasn't apparent for me when I was reviewing it, but they did listen to that feedback and they moved the brake lights up a bit. They actually kind of started with what I would say is they started with the biggest high point, right? So one thing that they noted is that the charging has been improved significantly. Now, if you've owned a Bolt EV before or just been anywhere near EV forums, you'll know that the Bolt has been long panned for its slow EV charging speeds, even when it was the fastest non-Tesla EV in terms of charging and faster than any public chargers at the time. It was still sort of panned as being a slow charging EV. They just came right out of the gate and said, hey, look, this charges from 10% to 80% in 26 minutes. So I'm going to, strut my stuff here a little bit because that's right in the ballpark of what I was telling people to expect, right? Given what we know about the LFP chemistry that was going to go into the Bolt, this is, again, I think I noted in one of my newsletter articles, maybe in one of my videos, that Nikki from Transport Evolved had interviewed CATL at IAA, and they had said, our long-range, long-lasting LFP cells charge at an average rate of 2C. So for a 60 to 70 kilowatt hour battery pack, 2C, you're going to be charging from 10% to 80% in a little over 20 minutes, right? In that 20-minute range. So they basically confirmed that that is exactly what we should expect in terms of the charging speed. They did not confirm that CATL was their supplier. It could be a number of different suppliers. All we know is that they are being supplied with LFP for now. And yeah, it does look like it's a roughly 210 amp hour battery pack with a 2C average charging rate to 80%. And based on what they said, it will continue to charge relatively fast, faster than the old Bolt EV and faster than a lot of competitors once you get toward the top of the charging profile. So they were saying when they plugged in at 17%, the car said that it would take 55 minutes to charge all the way to full, right? So now you're looking at probably an hour and 10 minutes to charge from empty to full would be the likely outcome of that, maybe hour and 20 minutes at most, meaning you could pull in empty for a dinner stop and be ready to leave and the car would be at 100% battery. Not that you necessarily want to do that, but that's sort of unheard of in Chevrolet Bolt, in the Chevrolet Bolt world. But the 10% to 80% in a 26 minutes puts it, you know, outside of EGMP and Porsche. That puts the new Chevy Bolt basically at the top of the heap. That's faster than most Teslas. That's faster than, you know, like the VW ID4. So yeah, basically outside of like EGMP and Porsche and some really premium cars, premium EVs, that's about the fastest you're going to be able to charge from 10% to 80%. So yeah, they just basically right there kicked any assumptions of the Bolt, the new Bolt being a slow charging car. They just kicked those out of the room. Also confirmed, of course, we knew it was a J3400 NACS plug, and so we know that GM has access to the Tesla superchargers, and a lot of the public chargers now are starting to include the NACS J3400 adapter. I still foresee this being an issue. I see us being in adapter hell for probably the next 5 years at least, as people get their standards sorted out. So I still would not attempt to travel in the new Chevy Bolt without a CCS1 to J3400 adapter. I think you're going to want that, you know, even though everybody talks about the NACS port being native, you know, being a huge deal, it's still going to be limiting without an adapter. Now, the next thing that they did confirm too is that the new Bolt will have a 255-mile range. So that puts the efficiency of this new Bolt somewhere between the old Bolt EV and the Bolt EUV, right? So slightly more efficient than the EUV and slightly less efficient than the Bolt EV, but that's sort of to be expected. Also, I mean, while disappointing in the sense that I really do feel like automakers need to be targeting that 300 miles as a sort of a base range, anything above 200 to 250 miles is really a usable overall range for most people. Like I said, that it's sort of aspiring to an average of 300 to 400 miles of range as a fleet average. But given the current times, current battery costs, all those factors, a 200 to 250 mile range is reasonable. Also, I think it's important to note that this is a 255 mile GM Chevrolet range, right? And we've seen time and time again that generally speaking, GM EVs are getting close to their EPA combined range at a steady 70 miles an hour. Most other automakers are falling short of that by at least 10 to 15%. So when they say 255 miles of range, that's a really usable figure. And, I'll throw this in here as an anecdote as well. Like I said, we're seeing this new Bolt having an efficiency somewhere between the old Bolt EV and EUV. Well, in my 2017 Chevrolet Bolt EV, driving down to this event, 70, 75 mile an hour cruising speeds, even with we had a really gnarly 35 mile an hour crosswind, I was still getting 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour for that like 470, 480 mile trip. On the return, doing the same speed but without that crosswind, by the time I returned home, my efficiency was up to over 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour. So just looking at those numbers, right, if we sort of apply those to the new Bolt with a 65 kilowatt hour usable battery pack, you are really looking at an effective freeway speed range of at least 215 to 230 miles, depending on how fast you're driving. You'd have to be well over 80 miles an hour, and in winter conditions, likely cold weather, like I said, likely some sort of heavy wind, wintry conditions, you'd have to be in that driving, like I said, over 75 to 80 miles an hour before you'd even drop below 200 miles of freeway range on a full battery. So that's why I say that 255 miles of range from a Chevrolet EV is definitely what I would consider a usable range. And one thing I will note too is, and I'm gonna give a kudos to you guys, because I saw this in a lot of comments in the channel when I commented on that GM Authority video, and it showed the DIC for the new Bolt. It was like 194 miles. Some of you pointed out, hey, based on that SOC rating, it's likely to be about a 250 to 260 mile range, right? And a lot of you called that out and pointed it out. And so, yeah, you were right. 255 miles is the rated range at a full battery. So good on you guys. I was hoping to see, based on my calculations, pie in the sky was closer to like 275. But that was, again, with a 70 kilowatt hour battery pack. So it looks like the best they can do is 65. So, yeah, and like I said, so it's right in the ballpark of, I think, what some of us experienced Bolt EV EUV owners were expecting. Some of the other things that Mandy went over were, there is a interior refresh. The versions that we got to see were engineering versions. They weren't the final production version. So I'd be a little bit leery of applying too much. The one, like the interior refresh that we know what it's going to look like, right, is it a DIC and the larger screens. It sounds like they're set on those climate control buttons, and again, physical buttons for climate control, physical buttons for the volume knob on the radio. These were all things customers asked for, and they made sure to keep them. Larger displays, which we saw, it basically does look just like the Equinox EV, kind of in terms of the DIC and the display. So those are all welcome changes. Again, reiterating that Super Cruise is available. The other big question that people had, and I felt like I might have been the only one who was let down by this. Everybody else seemed somewhat impressed. And I think this is maybe a result of Tesla trying and failing to steal the thunder from this event, because people knew this was happening. This was not a secret. And the day before, Tesla lifted the embargo on their Model 3 Standard and Model Y Standard. And so people started releasing videos leading into this Bolt event. Like I said, Tesla has done this before. They did the same thing with the Model 3 unveiling to sort of try to curb demand for the Chevy Bolt EV. That didn't really work either. So what ended up happening, though, is I think people were going in with this knowledge that, okay, Tesla's cut prices now and they're under 40,000, and it's like the mid 30,000s for a Model 3 or a Model Y. Can Chevrolet beat that? Well, I mean, yeah, yeah, they can. Um, we're talking about a completely different class of car. We're talking about a true economy car, not a premium slash luxury car attempting to be a budget economy car. And so I think I was the only one who was disappointed in the price, but not necessarily for the price of the RS. So what they told us is, hey, there's going to be an RS trim and an LT trim. They confirmed that. That's common knowledge, I think, at this point. But the RS trim is going to be $29,990. And that, okay, fine, it's the RS trim. It's a slightly better upgraded version. Okay. But then they said that the LT trim, which they'll start producing a few months later, is going to be $28,995. There's only basically $1,000 difference between the RS and the LT. And I think that's kind of a disappointment, or at least for me. I was really hoping that at least for the LT trim, they could come in at under, well, hopefully hit the $25,000 mark, because I feel like that's the point at which we can really start to see EVs pick up in adoption, because there are a lot of price sensitive buyers who would buy a new EV, and anything north of 25,000 and they're going to be really stretching their budget for it, especially now. So I feel like that was the miss. The miss was really in the delta between the RS and the LT, and not really hitting that $25,000 mark. But one couple of caveats in this in terms of pricing is, one, those prices, those MSRPs, include shipping and destination. What that means is, a lot of car companies, their shipping and destination fees can easily add $1,000 or more. So they give you this MSRP, but then you say, well, wait a minute, now to get it to me or to get it to a dealership, it's another $1,000, $1,200, $1,500. That's kind of a bait and switch, really. So the fact that they folded that shipping and destination into the MSRP, I think, adds a decent amount of transparency for the consumer, and it makes that $29,000 and $28,000 marks, it makes them, I think, more compelling, because now okay, that is the actual cost, and then everything else on top of it is just going to be like tax, license, the typical fees and taxes that you're going to pay in addition. But this is a sub $30,000 car. It is kind of planting the flag in the hill and saying this is a sub $30,000 car. So I think on that regard, they nailed it. And especially, like I said, the sentiment I think I saw from other people there was that GM Chevrolet nailed the price for the Chevy Bolt. Like I said, I would still like to see the LT a little bit cheaper. Now, the one thing that Mandy said that I think set a lot of people off, feel like the Chicken Littles, the sky is falling. She said that the new Bolt is going to be a limited production run. And I think people immediately saw the worst in that, right? The responses I saw is basically gasps. Oh, they're already killing the new Bolt. And I went and asked Mandy directly after this for confirmation, and she confirmed, well, she assuaged all of my doubts with one statement: we will build to demand, right? That's all I needed to hear, because she said, right now we have one shift only planned at the Fairfax assembly plant, but we will build to demand. And I've noted that, in theory, a single shift could be 90 to 100,000 vehicles a year. That would already put the Bolt, in the top 5, close to top 3 in terms of total production, annual production numbers for a single model. I honestly think, hearkening back to the Jaws exhibition, I think you're going to need a bigger shift. I think they're going to need another shift at Fairfax, because I just see the demand for this being so high. But the other thing is, what I interpret when they say it's going to be a limited production run, one of the other things that I was able to confirm is that this new Chevy Bolt is still built on the older BEV2 platform. So it is not built on the new BEV3 platform that came with the Equinox EV, the Blazer EV, the Cadillac Lyriq Optiq. So it's the older platform. And I asked, well, how are you getting Super Cruise on it? How are you getting all of these other features into it? And because the electronics architecture on BEV2, as far as we knew, it didn't support the global B that was being used in Ultium, and they kind of had to shoehorn the Super Cruise into the Bolt EUV model. And Mandy confirmed that they created a new electronics architecture for this Bolt. So my assumption is it's still derivative of global B. That's my interpretation of that. But it is, in their eyes, a new electronics architecture. But again, this is the BEV2 chassis. So when they said it's a limited production run, my assumption with that is they know that BEV2 is a dead end. So my expectation is they're probably going to build this version of the Chevrolet Bolt for no more than 2 to 3 years, regardless of demand. They've already shown their capacity to design new EVs off the BEV3 platform in very short turnaround times. So it could even be 2 model years, maybe even 1. That seems like a little bit of a stretch to me, but my interpretation is they know that BEV2 is a dead end, and whatever replaces the Bolt is going to be on BEV3. And that might just be a newly refreshed Bolt EV, right? Because they've already done the hard work with the Bolt. Like I said, BEV2 platform has been used for 9 years now. The body paneling, the tooling, all of this stuff existed. So they already did the hard work for this Bolt. It will probably take them at least 24 months to modify a BEV3 chassis platform for a replacement Bolt. And that's what I'm expecting out of them. That's what I'm expecting them to do. And then, of course, the great thing about BEV3 is not only does it integrate into their other architecture better, it also allows for things like rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive configurations. So it's very possible that we see a 2029 or 2030 model year Chevrolet Bolt hot hatch version, Bolt SS, rear-wheel drive, maybe rear-wheel drive as a standard, who knows. So we could see all sorts of possibilities out of a transition to a BEV3 platform, but we have to understand that from GM's internal perspective, from Chevrolet's internal perspective, this Bolt is a dead end, limited production run. So I would be leery of feeding too much into the rumors that they're killing the Bolt before it's even released, because that's kind of the impression that I got from the people who were there with me. And I think that's an overreaction, and I don't think it accurately represents Chevrolet's sort of development and production pathway for an entry-level EV like the Bolt. So one of the other things that I I thought was really nice coming from this is Jeremy Shaw who's the vehicle chief engineer. He was talking about the validation process for the Bolt. And again, this feeds into what I was talking about, how they had already done a lot of the work on the Bolt. It was already sort of a validated platform in many ways. So I feel like they kind of got a head start with this. But they've been doing a lot of work on it already. And they had talked about how, they normally just do, validation drives. Basically, it sounds like in the Midwest. And what I thought was cool about this is he basically said, hey, look, we're doing this event. We want to do it in Southern California, Universal Studios. Why don't we drive there in the Chevy Bolts? Because again, these are all still engineering models, all pre-production models. And how do you put it? Yeah, what if we drove 4 cars, 3,000 miles per car, 12,000 miles, he said 118 charge cycles. So just as a note, that would equal about an average of about 102 miles per charge cycle. So clearly they're not charging to full. They're road tripping these cars, probably some short stops, some longer stops. But apparently they took Route 66, they got their kicks, and through 8 states. They went over the Hoover Dam, they went to Death Valley, and they went up into the Sierra Nevada mountains, and then came down into Southern California. So it sounds like a great trip, right? Sounds like a fun trip, one that I might have done parts of. So, and that's where they were talking about how, they were. It sounds like, yeah, even with the when they talked about 55 minutes to charge from 17% to full. Yeah, he just confirmed that, well, we didn't charge full. We just spent 20 minutes and then left for Southern California. So just a thought about, yeah, you could charge up in the Bolt, the new Bolt. My guess is they're probably up somewhere like Coso Junction or someplace like that on Highway 395, charged for 20 minutes, and that was enough to get them down into LA. So very impressive stuff, right? We're seeing, and these are validated road trips. And then again, like I said, the images that you're gonna, that you're seeing in this video, these aren't production cars. They aren't show cars. They were driven 3,000 miles to get there by the engineering team. And then I think the big thing, and I think the big hit with this event is they're basically like, hey, this isn't just showing you. We're going to let you drive these cars, right? So they said normally, legally, they can't allow someone to drive these cars because they are engineering cars. But we're on Universal Studios lot. So yes, there are roads. Yes, there are towns that you're driving through. But this is all private property. It's all a closed circuit. It's all, it's an off-road. You don't need license and registration and anything else, right? This is a closed lot. There are different rules of the road there. You have to, the right-of-way always goes to the golf carts that are, carrying cast and crew around, and there are trams with people visiting. So there are actually films being shot. There's actually live production going on the lot while we were there. So we kind of have to work around Universal Studios requirements, right? So they did a great job managing all of that. But like I said, I think that was the big hit is, hey, all of you're going to be able to drive for yourself. So I also have some driving impressions of the vehicle, just in terms of, it's a Bolt, and I joked with him as I got in. He's like, I'm like, wow, I haven't driven a Bolt in like 5 hours. So yeah, he said you're jonesing already. So and I was. So driving impressions overall, it felt a lot like the 2023 Chevrolet Bolt EUV that I drove, but I would say that the ride was even smoother and more refined. So they've done some work on the suspension. I think it handled it great. They have a set from The Good Place. They have a set from The Good Place, which, you know, if you watch that series, has like cobblestone roads. And I might have pooched it a little bit going up the hill on one of those cobblestone roads just to kind of feel it. And yeah, I feel like the suspension, the steering input felt almost the same. But I would say that the suspension and ride handling was improved, right? It felt like a softer, more refined, more stable ride. Um, Google OS is very responsive, very easy to use, very intuitive. Had no issues with that. The DIC is pretty straightforward. I didn't get to mess with a whole lot of it. I'm not a big ambient lighting guy, but I mean, they have some pretty cool options for ambient lighting, and it sounds like, unlike before in previous bolts, in this bolt, it's going to be available across all trims. So if you're an ambient lighting person, I think even the LT will have it. That I'm not 100% on. The cameras are great, and in fact, like I feel like every time I get into a Chevrolet Bolt, a new model year, new version, they've done something to improve the cameras. And now they also have, it's almost like a weird night vision for the rear backup camera, where all of a sudden, like you don't, like those streets at Universal Studios, like I drove at nighttime, those streets are dark at nighttime. There's no street lights, right? I put it into reverse, and the reverse camera felt almost like predator vision. Everything, the contrast was so high. There was no color, but it was like I can see perfectly right out of that nighttime camera. You know, a feature I don't have is old hat for the Bolt is the rear view camera, which is also nice, especially at nighttime. Like I said, I could really not see anything at all in the regular rear view mirror, so that was nice. The camera stitching is really good. You can see all the way down to the tires, like all of that. The GM, just based on what I've seen, has some of the best cameras in the business right now. So it was nice to see all of that integrated. One thing that I didn't like that was missing now is the regen on demand paddle is gone. And the control over the regen and the sportiness, right, of the drive, that's all managed through the screen, the main infotainment screen. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but we kind of saw it coming. And then in terms of the regenerative braking, in the strongest mode, it is stronger, I feel like, than the regen braking in my Bolt EV, in my 2017 Bolt EV. But it's probably on par, when I think about it, it's probably on par with how strong the regen is when I'm using the regen on demand paddle in my Bolt. So we're talking about, you see the warning for a stop sign and you're doing 60 miles an hour, you let off with one pedal, you will stop before you get to the actual stop sign, right? So it's a very strong, very robust regen. And then one of the other things that they changed with it, which I think is a huge improvement, is even when you're in the one pedal driving mode, it does not work in reverse, right? So in reverse, creep is still on. And that was one of the biggest things that aggravated me about like the 2023, when it was still the button select and you pressed and it was one pedal. And then you go into reverse and it's like, it's still there. And I don't like I love, I'm a one pedal driving person. I one pedal drive all the time in L in my Bolt EV. I do not want one pedal driving in reverse. That's the time when it becomes counterintuitive and I don't really care for it. The other thing is too, they did shift from that button shifter layout to the stock shifter, which we expected, with the parking brake integrated into that stock shifter. So, I mean, the parking brake is a little bit, I feel like almost too easy. But I think maybe a lot of that is just more muscle memory with me right now, just adjusting to the pull up, pull down for drive and reverse. And again, I'm not a big fan. They did remove the on off, start off button. I really do like the ability to physically turn a car on or turn it off. The way it works right now, as long as the fob is in the vehicle, you press the brake and the bolt will turn on. And I think that is the standard, right? Like across GM's EV platforms at this point. I would still like a physical on button. One of the nice things about my Chevy Bolt is I can press the power, turn it on, close the car, and it will stay on for up to an hour, right? And it's very predictable. That is my dog mode, right? Like, and I feel like if you're gonna leave a pet in the car, it better not be for more than an hour. Like, you know, and so I've always felt really confident with my car, even on hot days. I have my puppy in the car, or sometimes I'm taking the little kitties back from the vet, and it's, you know, 90 or 100 degrees. I have the AC blasting. I get out of my car, make sure it's on, close the door, and I'm confident that I can go into the store and grab something, you know, and then I know that the AC is running the whole time. With this, I just, like, it almost feels like now they've kind of cornered themselves into having some sort of an app-based feature that you have a doggy mode or a pet mode or whatever, and that's just also not as confidence inspiring as knowing I can turn my car on and leave it on. It's also a big deal with internet, right? With having like 5G or 4G LTE, where you aren't getting signal anywhere else, being able to leave your car on for a set period of time so that you can access and use that internet even when you're not in the car. It's kind of a big deal. So yeah, I think that was a miss in terms of just no start stop button where you can just physically turn the car on and off. But otherwise, like I said, everything else about it, physical buttons again for volume, climate control. They're going to have ventilated seats. And that was the other thing. These are engineering sort of prototypes. So some of them had older seats. It looked like the LT one had newer, refreshed cloth seats with more cushioning. But they're going to have the option in the RS for leather perforated, heated, ventilated seats, which I think is awesome. A lot of the other things didn't really change in terms of just the overall driving experience. And frankly, they just really didn't need to. Like it was otherwise, overall, it's just already a solid platform. So I just wanted to close on some of the more technical details. You know, I did not ask about the heat pump. I might have mentioned that already. Well, and I'm reasonably sure that it does have a heat pump, and the reason for that is I believe all of the Ultium EVs now have it, and the new Chevrolet Bolt, I was right, is using the Equinox, the same motor as the Chevy Equinox. So I kind of figured that because of the way they had integrated things and worked with LG on the old Bolt EV, I just didn't think that it was going to be sustainable for them to continue working with LG for motor production. And it wouldn't make sense anyway, given they'd brought a lot of that in-house with, like I said, with the Ultium line. So it was confirmed to me that they are using the Equinox EV and same motor as is also in the Blazer EV. But this one, I want to say it's depowered, right? It's a lower power version. It's only 210 horsepower. So the old Bolt EV EUV were 150 kilowatt motors, which were roughly equivalent to 200 horsepower. So this is a slight bump in horsepower, maybe like 5. So it's not a significant jump in power, but it is the same motor out of the Equinox. So again, we're seeing this sort of slow integration of the Ultium hardware into the Bolt platform. At the motor, it's 210 horsepower and 169 pound-feet of torque. Now, that's actually a reduction in the pound-feet of torque that the older Bolt EV EUV had, but the gear ratios are different. And so my understanding with that drive unit, and I haven't seen this fully confirmed anywhere, but working backward from the math, my understanding with that drive unit is it is capable of up to about 14,000 RPM. In the Equinox EV, it has, I think, a 13.5 to 1 gear reduction ratio, pretty significant gear reduction ratio. The old Bolt EV EUV on the older motor, which had a max RPM of 8,800 RPM, they had a gear reduction of around a 7 to 1 gear reduction ratio. So the gear reduction ratio for the new Bolt is 11.5 to 1. So it's a slightly taller, I guess you would say, gear set than the gears in the Equinox or the Blazer EV, but still much lower gear set than the gears in the outgoing Bolt EV EUV. So the actual torque at the wheels is significantly higher for the new Bolt than it is for the old Bolt EV EUV. Also, though, you can do the math and figure it out because it is using, the new Bolt is using the same tires as the old Bolt EV EUV. So same outside diameter, same 815 rotations per mile. Based on those numbers, we can kind of assume that they have, and this is maybe a letdown for some people. I've never seen it as a huge issue, but it does look like the top speed of this Bolt is going to still be somewhat limited to around 90-ish miles an hour. So very similar to the old Bolt EV EUV. And there is a bit of a trade-off there, right? Because the higher the gearing, the higher the top speed, but at the same time your acceleration is going to suffer. So it looked like that they did the best they could to manage that low-end torque performance while still getting the top speed that would be required for a road car. And like I said, the likelihood that you need to go significantly faster than 90 to 95 miles an hour is very low. And the roads where you can do that legally are very few and far between. Now, I also didn't get a confirmation on the curb weight, but it does sound like it's very similar. So we'll have to wait and see. My expectation is it is somewhere around 3,500 to 3,800 pounds of curb weight, which makes it slightly heavier, right, than the equivalent internal combustion car, but nowhere near what we've seen from other EVs, regardless of automaker, right? Like this is still going to be a fairly light EV in terms of EV world. One other thing that they had mentioned too, just as a side note, because charging from 10% to 80% in 26 minutes is great, but it really also comes down to the charging profile. And because we were talking about the old Bolt EV maxing out at like 55 kilowatt, just over 55 kilowatt peak charging speeds, and one of the reps told me, we were still charging at, nearly 60 kilowatts at a 85% battery. That's pretty good. Like you're basically still charging at 1C, right? At 85% battery, telling me that the taper is fairly gentle, fairly consistent, and it means that you're going to have, really reasonable charging times, even if you decide to stay past charging to 80%. So that was a nice thing to see. I think one of the other big things too, because I was speaking to the representative from GM Energy, the new Bolt does have V2L, right? Vehicle to load, vehicle to grid capability integrated into it. So it's a smart car, right? It can help you with your backup system. And I think it tells me too, right, that if they're adding it to the Chevrolet Bolt, it's going to be a standard feature and option across their entire lineup. And I think part of that is they are really looking to sell their GM Energy home solutions, which do seem fairly compelling. Price-wise, I'm not as sure about it. And so talking to the GM Energy representative about the bidirectional charging capability, they call it their power shift charger. It's still capable of the 80 amps, the 19.2 kilowatt, the wall EVSE charger. Just the rest of the system integrates. They have a 13 kilowatt hour battery pack, a 17.5 kilowatt hour battery pack, and then I guess it's stackable up to like a 35 kilowatt hour battery pack. And then, of course, that's just meant to give a buffer for when your vehicle's not there and you have solar. But one of the other things that he had noted to me is that their inverter also accepts a direct feed from solar. So it basically accepts a DC input. And that's been kind of a criticism of some of the other power backup systems that require an AC input. So they're really there only for like a grid tie system, whereas it sounds like this is something that, you know, you can just continue to feed, just basically feed your solar directly into the GM Energy home solution. So that was pretty cool. And like I said, that vehicle to load, vehicle to grid is a really big deal, I feel like, for the Chevrolet Bolt. And I think those are most of the technical details I have at this point. One thing I did want to note, you know, because I'm a big proponent of my own subsequent charge range metric for measuring how far and how long you can travel between charging stops, right, when you're DC traveling. But what I wanted to call out with this was that just doing the numbers, like based on a 65 kilowatt hour battery pack, my expectations of over 200 mile, like 215 plus mile range at 75 miles an hour. If you were to do the Bjorn Nieland 1,000 kilometer, 621.4 mile challenge at 75 miles an hour, assuming that you plan on arriving at each one of your stops with 10% battery, you could do that challenge in 9 hours and 40 minutes, right? It would be 3 26-minute charging stops, and you would do that drive. You would do 1,000 kilometers or 621.4 miles in 9 hours and 40 minutes going 75 miles an hour. And so to put that into perspective, when I did the 1,000 kilometer challenge, I believe it was the 2020 Chevrolet Bolt EV. It was when it got the upgraded battery pack. So I think it was the 2020. That's 2 hours faster than I was able to do the 1,000 kilometer challenge in the 2020 Chevrolet Bolt EV. And I was driving faster than 75 miles an hour for a good portion of that trip. So to say that this is impressive in terms of what Chevrolet has done with the new Bolt, I think is an understatement. And, you know, you can go check Bjorn's records for where a 9 hour and 40 minute 1,000 kilometer challenge would place the Bolt. But let's put it this way. I think we're now seeing what, in my opinion, might be one of the best road tripping cars. The combination of the charging and the efficiency means that this car is going to be able to travel nearly as fast as some of the fastest traveling EVs on the road for less money, right? Because of the, you know, expected efficiency, where a lot of these other EVs are maybe low 3 mile per kilowatt hour, on a good day at freeway speed and dropping below that on a bad day, uh, yeah, you're gonna be 10, 15, 20% more efficient in the Bolt, and you're going to be charging just as fast. So, yeah, I think overall, it's basically turned the 2027 Chevrolet Bolt into the lowest cost, probably easiest to access, most available EV that could replace an ICE car in a single car family or household. So I think that's kind of what we are seeing based on, Kyle Connor did an out of spec review of the Model 3, I think it was standard, or Model Y standard, in the charging. The new Bolt's charging is faster, and it's likely to be every bit as efficient as the Model Y standard. So a little bit less maybe than the Model 3, but thousands of dollars cheaper, more cargo capacity than the Model 3 standard, less cargo capacity than the Model Y, but more efficient and nearly $10,000 cheaper, or at least $10,000 cheaper, and charges just as fast. So, like, I don't even think that those cars are a good comparison. The Nissan Leaf is probably the better comparison. So, the new Chevy Bolt is cheaper than the 300-mile Nissan Leaf, but more expensive than the 200-mile Nissan Leaf. But with 255 miles of range and the charging capability, it really puts it on par. And Nissan has the issue that they've already stated, that they're having production issues with the new Nissan Leaf. And based on what we've seen, they're expecting to only be able to produce maybe 500 a month for the US domestic market. So if you're in the market for a sub $30,000 EV, uh, yeah, I actually don't think right now that the new Chevrolet Bolt, the 2027 Chevrolet Bolt, has any competition. And I think I'll actually close with saying this. I think it is the closest thing that we in the United States have to a Chinese EV, right? In terms of cost and capability and value, right, for that cost. So I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to it overall. I think it's a huge hit. I think it's a huge success for Chevrolet, and I think the main issues are with the messaging. I would just get ahead of the rumor mills of, oh, they're trying to kill EVs again. Not that it matters, right? Because the people who are making those claims are people who are never going to say nice things about GM anyway, and they're likely never going to buy a GM EV product anyway, right? So, as I said with the Chevrolet Volt, when the same sort of rumor mill was trying to kill the Chevrolet Volt, it's like, well, if you don't want GM to end production on the Chevrolet Volt, go buy one. You've had 10 years to do so. Go buy one. And if you don't, you can't complain about a company ending production of a car if you yourself have said, yeah, but I'm not going to buy it for myself. I just want to see it available. Well, put your money where your mouth is, right? So that's how I look at that. So um, I think with the messaging, I think GM just needs to be very clear that, hey, we are building to demand. If demand says that we need a second shift at Fairfax, well, I think demand might say that. And if you're, know that the BEV2 platform is going to be obsolete, let people know that it's going to be replaced. It's not going to just be ended, right? People, I think, get a little too fixated on name badges and model badges. And, Chevy Bolt, the Bolt badge carries a lot of weight with it now just because of how good and capable of an EV it is. So I would say that GM definitely needs to get ahead of these rumors, make sure that they're saying, hey, look, this Chevrolet Bolt, we're building to demand, and we will replace it, not just end it when the time comes. So, but like I said, it's just a great car. It was already a good foundation, and Chevrolet, the team, they just built on that strong foundation, made improvements, and yeah, I can't wait to actually get my hands on a production version. It's going to be great. So anyway, I hope you liked it. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what you think, and I'll go check out some of the other articles and videos that have been posted on this. I know there's going to be a ton of them. In case I happened to miss anything, I know, like I said, Nikki at Transport Evolved team was there taking great videos. I'm sure their video quality is going to be much better than mine. Plus, I think they got to drive through the studio a lot when there was a little bit better light. So make sure you check out Transport Evolved, Jim's EV Adventures. There's a lot of content creators there who were able to get some really good content. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, if I missed anything major in particular. And as always, thank you for watching.